with you today with my next part in my series about sewing your own jeans. If you've missed any of the previous videos, you may want to go back in my channel and check those out. Today's video is going to talk all about cutting, marking, and other tips that I have for sewing your own jeans. Let's talk about cutting out your pattern and marking it. You can see kind of over here while I'm talking, there is a time-lapse video of me cutting out this pair of jeans. And here are a couple tips I have. First of all, grain line is really important on jeans because the twill weave of denim is kind of diagonal. If you don't cut on the grain line, you're going to have your jeans legs like twisting around your leg as you wear them. So you do want to be really careful about marking your grain line. In fact, sometimes if it's tricky, it's worth measuring from the selvage to the grain line on your pattern to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. In addition to paying attention to grain line, I have a tip about pockets. First of all, and we're going to talk about fitting in a second here, but I suggest for your first pair of jeans that you pin the pocket on the bum, because where the pocket looks best on my bum versus whoever the pattern was drafted from versus you personally might be a little bit different, and sometimes a little bit further out or further in or tilted in or out may flatter the shape that you personally have better than whatever the pattern suggests. But once you nail down where that spot is, I highly recommend transferring that to your pattern so that you don't have to pin the pocket on yourself every time you make a pair of jeans. And then what I recommend, especially if you've traced your jeans off of tissue pattern paper onto like paper, I like to cut out the pocket marking on my jeans. And I then can go in, and chalk is my favorite marking tool when I am making jeans. And it marks really well on denim, and then that way I can trace out exactly where that pocket should go. And I know exactly where I need to pin it on, including any tilting that I've done. All right, finally, I'm not going to take you step by step through sewing a pair of jeans because I think most patterns have pretty good instructions on this, at least the ones that I've tried. But what I am going to share is a few more of my best tips for success when you are making jeans. First of all, pre-wash your fabric. Do not skip this step. Do not pass go. Do not start cutting out your jeans without pre-washing. Whether you are using non-stretch fabric or stretch fabric, you need to pre-wash. You need to consider pre-washing multiple times because there's nothing worse than putting all this effort into sewing up the jeans and top stitching them all, which takes a long time because every seam you're stitching it and then you're doing something to finish that seam and then you're top stitching it. So you're essentially sewing every seam 3 times. You don't want to do all that work and then have them shrink where they don't fit you or where you're wearing them shorter than you wanted them to be. So pre-wash multiple times. And even consider leaving yourself a longer hem at first or not hemming and pre-washing again before you hem so that you make sure you don't end up with shrunken jeans. Next, I strongly recommend doing some kind of muslin to fit your pants before you cut out your denim. So if you're using non-stretch denim, you can use actual muslin fabric to fit it. Just remember that in the back, part of the rise for the crotch here is made up by these yoke pieces. So one time I was making a muslin for myself and I got the 2 backs and I got the 2 fronts and I combined this pocket piece. I just pinned these 2 pattern pieces together so it was all cut like as one piece, and I could not figure out why it was not fitting in the back, why it was so short in the back, and it did not seem to fit my crotch at all. I'm doing all these fitting things, and finally what I realized was I had skipped the yoke. The yoke is an important part of how the back fits, so make sure that you cut out the yoke as well as the backs to do your fitting. You can skip belt loops, you can skip pockets, you can skip the double waistbands, you just need the outer waistband, you can skip doing the zipper if you want, you can just hold your fly closed and pin it shut after you've got them on, but try out of a muslin first. Now the tricky thing is if you're sewing stretch jeans and you do a muslin, then the stretch of the denim may make them not fit quite as tightly as the muslin did if the muslin didn't stretch. And at the same time, you don't want to use like t-shirt fabric to sew your jeans because this is going to stretch a whole lot more than stretch denim. So for those cases, I suggest going ahead making the muslin out of woven muslin fabric and then being aware that you may have to take everything in a little bit if you want really, really fitted through like the hips or even the legs. And that leads me to my next tip. After you have done all the fitting on the muslin, after you have checked out this link to see common pants fitting issues and how to fix them, you've got the muslin fitting the way you want, you used the woven muslin fabric, and now you're going to cut out of either non-stretch or stretch denim. Either way, what I highly recommend you doing is not putting in the fly, just kind of basting this together through the crotch seams, the side seams, and the inseams with a basting stitch, and then baste fitting your pants. Again, remember to put in the yoke. And then you can even check, just like you don't necessarily even have to put the waistband on, but just double check that fit, especially through the seat, because fit through the crotch and the seat is really critical on jeans, I think. I think that is the difference between a good pair of jeans and a bad pair of jeans. So check that by basting and fitting again before you go through. I'm going to sew each seam 3 times. Once you have the crotch that fits though, you can alter your legs at will. So you can see, let me fold this pair. You can see with this pair here, even though they have a wider leg than the original pattern, it is the same fit with the exception of these stretch and these don't, through the rest of the crotch, even through the upper thigh here, like you can see with these laying right on top of each other, they are the same. And if I was to lay out the faded pair or the black pair as well, you would see where I've altered the legs. So these kind of slim to the knees, and then they come out and flare at the bottom, whereas the darker ones you can see kind of come straight down the whole way, and they're a little wider at the bottom. Once you have that fit through the crotch, through the seat, the legs are easy. You can turn them into shorts, you can make them wider, you can make them skinny. You just like go and you baste fit like how skinny do you want them to be. And then you save that pattern alteration so that next time you want skinny jeans, you have the skinny leg that you can use with them. Okay, finally, let me give you a couple of top stitching tips, because since you're using contrast thread for your jeans, usually the top stitching gets kind of critical. So the very first thing I want to note, if you look at these 2 rows of stitching, these are done with heavy duty thread, and there are 2 different stitch lengths. So with this one, I have the 2.5 millimeter default stitch length on my machine. And for this one, the only thing I changed is that I changed this one to a 4 millimeter stitch length. And you can see how that puts more thread on the surface of the fabric, whereas with the smaller stitch, the thread kind of gets buried in the fabric. This is more visible than this, even though they are the exact same thread. So lengthen your stitches for your top stitching. The next thing is, if you don't want to mess with heavy duty thread, you can, if your machine will do a triple stitch, you can try to experiment with that. And this is also great for stretch denim because a triple stitch does stretch. So you can use, this is regular thread. You can see how pale it is on this fabric. Even though I've lengthened the stitch, it is paler than this because it is thinner thread. But the darkest and most obvious stitch of all is actually this one in regular thread where I did a triple stitch. So this is the same stitch length, these 2 here, but this one used that triple stitch and therefore it stretches and it's more visible. The downside to this one is because it is triple stitch, if you have to seam rip it, it's going to take forever to take it out. And that is something to keep in mind. This type of stitching, not so difficult to pull out either, but this, since it's 3 stitches for everyone, yeah, you better make sure that you're top stitching exactly where you want the top stitching. Make sure to check out this playlist about sewing jeans so that you'll know everything I've shared about sewing jeans.